if you only have two children right now. And you don't need to be pushing yourself to try for another when you feel like you can barely stand. Okay? That's my point. That nowhere in the teachings of the Catholic Church, in the Bible, are we, is our sanctification, is our dignity defined by the number of children we have. My sanity saver for you today is getting outside. I think in today's world, especially when we're in front of screens so much of the time, getting outside is sometimes the best thing you can possibly do for yourself. And especially if you have young kids, getting them outside just is so good for them. It puts them in much better moods. Sometimes with the weather, it can be challenging, but as often as you can get outside, I would encourage it. I'm a homeschool mom of three, ages 8, 5, and 2, and we have to get outside or we all just go crazy, especially my boys. And I wasn't originally going to talk about this, but God just sort of put it on my heart. And I know that sounds maybe not genuine, but really, I was putting my son to bed, and all of these thoughts just started coming to my head. And I'm like, okay, I need to go record this. But I think in the Catholic world, especially for Catholic homeschool moms and even like more conservative Catholics, there's sort of this perception that in order to be a good Catholic mom, you have to have as many children as possible as fast as possible. And if you're not popping out kids every 2 years or even more often than that, then you're not a good Catholic. And I just really want to say that no, in no way does the Catholic Church teach this. Quite the opposite, actually. And that, yes, the purpose of marriage, according to the Catholic Church, is unification and procreation. That is the purpose of marriage. So if you get married and you don't intend to have kids, then you're not in line with the teaching of the Catholic Church. However, the church teaches that it is up to the discernment of the married couple to decide how many children they have and at what rate they're going to have those children. Now, obviously, we are not going to have complete control over that. And that's a good thing. A married couple shouldn't have complete control over that. However, the church does allow and does encourage the married couple to be discerning in those very large life decisions. So my husband and I met with a priest actually before we had our third child because we were trying to be very discerning and very respectful of the two children that we currently had because one in particular, but both of them had some pretty significant health challenges. And we were concerned about moving forward with having a third when we still had some health challenges going on that we had not resolved with the other two. And my husband in particular was very concerned that they would get neglected and that their health progress would stagnate if we had a third child. And I was sort of more emotionally wanting to, every life is precious. And I, want to bring life into the world. That's something that's always been on my heart. I wanted to be like a mom of 8 children. And we have 2 in heaven. So technically we're at 5, but we have 3 on earth. And so, the process needs to be discerning not just of future children, but of the children you have currently, what their needs are. And I think for a lot of people, there's this misunderstanding that the only reason to not have more children is if you physically, financially cannot provide for them. Like if you cannot feed them, if you cannot put a roof over their head, then you shouldn't have more children. That is also not what the church teaches. As parents, it is also our job to provide for our children spiritually, emotionally, physically. If you are so pulled in 100 different directions, so exhausted, so tired, so spent, that you cannot consistently show love to your current children, then it is not a good time to have another. Now, obviously, there are seasons where we are going to be just utterly exhausted and not be able to provide maybe the best display of Christ's love to our children. And that's okay. There are seasons of life. I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty here. Okay. I have been there. All right. And especially with my first daughter, I was exhausted because she was dealing with some severe health issues. I was spent emotionally, spiritually, physically. There was not much left of me, but I still felt that it was God's will um, to be open to life. We didn't we weren't like actively trying to have another child when I was in that season of just complete emptiness. And by emptiness, I don't mean like desolation. I mean, I was in survival mode. I was surviving, and so was our family. So to then add another child into that mix was not going to be a healthy thing. However, the minute we got out of survival mode, literally like not even 2 weeks after we got out of survival mode, I was speaking to my husband and saying, I would like to try for number two. And he looked at me like I was insane. I mean, he was very concerned about me, about the health of the second child, because our first child, we still were dealing with a lot of challenges with health, but we had gotten out of the survival mode phase of it. And he was concerned that our second would have the same health issues. So, I mean, I'm not coming from a place of everything's been super easy and I think everyone should just never be exhausted. No, I get it. There are definitely seasons of that. And you can still care for your children in those seasons. And it's good for them to see that, everybody goes through periods of struggling. So we don't have to be perfect for our kids. That's not at all what I'm advocating for. But there does need to be a certain consistency with the love that we are able to display. If our consistency is exhaustion, irritation, emptiness, then something needs to be reevaluated before having another child. And the Catholic Church does encourage this. It encourages the proper discernment of when to have another child. And here's the caveat though: birth control, like straight up birth control, is never an option in the Catholic Church for good reason. Because when you start to bring birth control into the picture, you are eliminating the will of God there. You're trying to play God. Now, obviously, God is all powerful. He can work around both birth control. He's done it many times for many people. But we don't want to be making that choice. We don't want to be making the choice where we're separating ourselves from the will of God. So that's why birth control is just not an option. And for our own sake, we don't want to be separated from the will of God. It does mean that natural family planning is an option. I know a lot of people think that natural family planning is not okay, that you should always be open to life. But there are definitely seasons where it is okay to be prudent with your spouse. And it's even a really beautiful experience for you and your spouse to have to practice that kind of self control for the good of the family, for the good of each other. When we first had our two miscarriages, my husband and I, we had to go through a period of prudence and chastity because we needed to figure out what was going on so that I wouldn't just keep getting pregnant and miscarrying. And that was a really challenging period of time because we were newly married, and but it was a beautiful experience as well because we both had to be really self-sacrificing. Anyway, so I'm sharing these personal experiences of when we've sort of had to discern um, what was best for our family. And I think a lot of times the perception is if people aren't having more children or if they're practicing NFP, it's just because they want the easier route or they just want life to be easier. And that's not always the case. And I would completely agree that a reason for not having more children should never be because you want life to be easier. Because if you're not pursuing God's will and you're pursuing just what's easy, life will not be easier. Or life may be comfortable, but eventually it's going to catch up with you that you're not pursuing God's will. And that, when it does catch up with you, will not be comfortable, especially if it catches up with you in the afterlife. So the goal of all of us should be salvation, right? So salvation is not earned by the number of children that you produce. There are saints who had no children at all. And there are saints who had only one child. The Queen of all saints only had one child, Mary, the Mother of God. So we cannot place this hierarchical, if that's a word, we cannot place this hierarchy of value on how many children women are able to have or how many children a woman does have. Because some women are physically able, but it's not God's will for them to have more. And we have to respect that that married couple is making that choice, discerning what God's will is. And I think that's part of what is so important about the discernment process of how many children to have, when to have them right now in today's world, because our children are facing things that children have never faced ever in history. We as Catholics, sending them to school is now dangerous in a way that it never has been before. Now, when we send them to school, they may be taught that a boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy. I mean, that's a whole new level of, oh my goodness, how do we deal with this? So, and again, if 50 years ago, you could let your children go play outside all day. And I always think of the movie The Sandlot. I don't know if y'all have seen it, but in The Sandlot, they they send their kids to school because the schools weren't teaching these crazy ideas that basically blur the line between right and wrong and glorify what's bad. So they could send them to school, and then during the summer, the kids would just go out and play. The moms had no idea where they were half the time. They would be gone from sun up to sundown. No one was worried about it. These kids, especially in the Sandlot, they just played baseball all day long outside. And that was so good for these children, so good for the parents. We don't have that anymore, though. I can't send my kids out to go play. I have to know where they are at all times because I have an 8, a 5, and a 2-year old. And in today's world, they absolutely cannot be out on their own. They can't even be in the backyard without me checking on them frequently. It's just a completely different world that we live in today. And so parents are called to a different type of discernment, I think. The other thing that we have that we're dealing with as parents that we never really have historically is this social media aspect of raising children in a world where the evils of the world are right there on a screen, accessible to whoever is near it. You don't even have to try to find the evils of the world online anymore. So we have more responsibility now. It requires not perfection in parenting because that doesn't exist, but consistent levels of awareness and love that I think were not as necessary in previous times. And, I mean, I think about like World War II, and obviously these kids were facing these horrible, horrific things when they had to go to war and they had to grow up so fast and the depression, like all of those things are horrible, but it's so different in terms of like an actual evil, like in war that you can see and touch with your hands and you can discern this is evil. Whereas now we have all this evil online and it's not discernible for these children, whether or not it's evil. So the parent's role has to be stepped up a little bit. We have to be able to help them. That's evil. That's wrong. So there's involvement, I think, that requires more hands-on attention. And I'm not talking helicopter parent where you never let them out of your sight. I mean, obviously I have a 2-year-old, so and he's a boy and he climbs. So I have to be aware of where he is most of the time. But when your kids get into older ages, you have to take your hands off a little bit and let them discover things. But at the same time, they need to know that you're there when they need you. They need to know that the when the floor falls out from under them, when something completely rocks their world, they need to know they have someone to go to that's always going to be there. And not just there physically, but they're mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And I'm not saying again, there are seasons where a parent is going to be tired, stressed. We're not asking for perfection here, but the consistent baseline should be enough to the extent that they know there's someone to depend on who can bring them truth. So I hope that this video is not upsetting to anyone. I hope that it doesn't come off judgmental because honestly, what I'm trying to say is that we need to pull back this judgment and this pressure that we have on Catholic women, that if you're not producing 7 or 8 children, you're somehow not a good Catholic parent, or if you and your spouse discern together that it's not the right time to have a child, if you and your spouse are earnestly and honestly discerning the will of God, then you're doing the right thing. And it's not always going to look like the same picture that somebody else has. But I think that's the ultimate point that I'm trying to make here is that if the married couple is honestly discerning the will of God when it comes to their family and the amount of children they have, when they have, then they're doing the right thing. And again, because birth control is not an option in the Catholic Church, if you're honestly discerning the will of God, even if you and your husband discern it's not the right time to have a child, you might get pregnant anyway. And that's great because then you know it absolutely was the will of God because you weren't trying and it still happened. So life life is always the will of God and we choose and our free will goes into how we react to it, how we provide for it, right? So I guess that's my point is that being open to life does not mean that as a mother, you have to reach a certain quota of children in order to be a good Catholic. I guess that's my point. If you have 12 children, I'm not judging you. Okay. If that is honestly what you and your spouse discern together and it's working for you guys and it's working for your family, I'm amazed by you. I'm in awe of you, and that's wonderful. But I guess I want to be a voice to all the moms out there who are questioning and wondering. I have spoken to priests about this. I've gone to spiritual direction for this. They have all told me the teaching of the Catholic Church is that it is up to the discernment of the married couple to discern the will of God in regards to the children that they have. Okay? So if you're doing that, if you and your spouse are honestly discerning what is best, what is God's will for us, then you're okay. Then you are okay. And you don't need to beat yourself up if you only have 2 children right now. And you don't need to be pushing yourself to try for another when you feel like you can barely stand. Okay? That's my point. That nowhere in the teachings of the Catholic Church, in the Bible, are we, is our sanctification, is our dignity defined by the number of children we have. And the sanity saver, which was tied into all of that, which again, I was not originally going to go into all of this, but getting outside. So for all the moms out there with all the kids, get outside with them. It'll help your mental sanity. It'll help theirs too. Thanks so much for listening to this, you guys. And if you would put in the comments any thoughts you have about this, I would love to hear them. And I'll see you next time.